Forget everything you think you knew about the Middle Ages after attending a modern-day Renaissance fair. Festivals in medieval times weren't the quaint traditions we envision today. They were wild, filthy, and sometimes deadly affairs where peasants mocked kings, saints mixed with sinners, and the beer never stopped flowing. The biggest medieval festivals could draw over 50,000 people, more than the population of most cities back then. But it wasn't just a party. It was a battlefield of class, chaos, and God. Welcome to the rowdiest, riskiest party in medieval Europe. Picture this, a muddy field, tents strung with colourful pennants, the air reeks of sweat, spit-roasted meat, and beer that went bad 2 centuries ago. This isn't a Renaissance fair, this is the real deal, where peasants drank beside nobles, fools became kings for a day, and entire towns went feral under the watchful eye of God. Medieval festivals weren't sideshows, they were social glue. Faith, fear, and fantasy rolled into one ritualized carnival, and for one brief moment, everyone let go. Chapter 1. The world turned upside down. Trying to understand the Middle Ages through royal proclamations and monastic records is like trying to understand Lollapalooza from their tax records. Yes, kings issued laws, popes declared doctrine, but down in the streets where people actually lived, the soul of medieval society was performing a very different script. The truth is, the Middle Ages were rigid. Life was ruled by birth, bound by class, and backed up by the church. Most people were stuck in the same village, working the same job, praying the same prayers from cradle to grave. But festivals shattered that rhythm, and they did so intentionally. One day, you were a nobody. The next, you were crowned the Lord of Misrule and commanded nobles to bring you wine while they bowed. For that one sanctioned moment, the social order wasn't just ignored, it was mocked. And everyone, peasants, merchants, friars, understood the paradox. You obeyed harder the rest of the year because you were allowed to rebel just enough during the feast. It was a cultural pressure release disguised as revelry. But festivals weren't just emotional safety valves, they were how people kept time. You didn't say, "I'll visit in September." You said, "I'll see you at St. Bartholomew's Fair." The church calendar wasn't a list of dates, it was a roadmap for life. Easter meant the resurrection and the start of spring planting. Lammas meant the first bread from the new grain. Michaelmas meant the end of the farming season and time to pay your debts. Each festival came with its own expectations. Wear this, eat that, pray here, dance there. It was social programming before iPhones ever existed. And here's the secret. These festivals were also classrooms. If you were illiterate, and 9 out of 10 people were, you didn't learn your place from a book. You learned it from watching who got to lead the procession and who had to sweep up after. You learned it from which saint got a statue, which fool got applause, and which heretic got burned. These events weren't just celebrations, they were live-action morality plays. And you were always in the cast, whether you realised it or not. So if you want to see the medieval world for what it truly was, don't start with a battlefield or a Bible. Start in the middle of the crowd, where the beer flows, the masks slip, and the world turns upside down, because that's where the truth danced, before it was ever written down. Chapter 2. Saints, Seasons and Spectacle. Medieval festivals weren't one-size-fits-all. They followed the rhythm of the world, sacred, seasonal, and savage. If the year was a wheel, festivals were its turning spokes, each one anchoring the chaos of life to something bigger. God, nature, kings, death. Let's walk through a year in the Middle Ages, not by dates, but by celebrations. Sacred days, God's greatest hits. Start with the sacred. The medieval church didn't just own your soul, it owned your calendar. There were over 50 official feast days, and that's not counting local saints or extra celebrations decreed by lords, popes, or pure superstition. Corpus Christi turned the streets into a mobile cathedral. Priests led processions carrying the Eucharist under embroidered canopies, while townsfolk built flower-strewn altars on every corner. Easter was the resurrection and the restart button for the farming year. Villagers built bonfires to chase away winter and feasted on lamb, eggs, and whatever hadn't spoiled in storage. Even Candlemas, a lesser-known feast in February, brought people together to bless candles, literal light in a world still ruled by darkness. And if you didn't show up to these feasts, it wasn't just antisocial, it was suspicious. God noticed who danced. Agrarian festivals, bread, ale, and borrowed time. Then came the earth festivals, rooted in the land and older than Christianity itself. May Day was less about flowers and more about fertility. Young men and women vanished into the woods and emerged, smiling. A maypole, topped with a red ribbon and circled by dancers, was as symbolic as it was scandalous. Lammas, on August 1st, celebrated the first loaf from the year's grain harvest, literally loaf mass. People brought bread to church, prayed it wouldn't be the last, and then drank until they forgot how bad the winter had been. Harvest festivals in the fall were bittersweet. You'd survived the growing season, but famine was always one bad frost away. These weren't just parties, they were spells, performed communally, to keep nature and fortune on your side. Markets, tournaments, and travelling theatres, business and blood sport. Not all festivals came from faith or farmland. Some came from commerce and carnage. Tournaments were part sporting event, part political stunt. Jousts, melees, and contests of arms filled the fields with dust and shattered lances. Lords flaunted wealth. Knights hunted glory. Peasants placed bets and got drunk enough to believe they could be knights too. At the edges of the lists, you'd find travelling fairs, makeshift cities of colour and chaos. Blacksmiths sold tools, spicers sold fantasy, cinnamon, saffron, and dried rose petals from lands most peasants would never see. Minstrels performed bawdy songs, while actors in wagon-mounted stages delivered morality plays with titles like Everyman and The Castle of Perseverance. It was education by entertainment, stories with stakes, where sin always got what it deserved, but only after a few good laughs. Carnival and misrule, when the masks take over, and then came the festivals that broke the rules, on purpose. Carnival marked the last gasp before Lent, a weeks-long purge of pleasure before 40 days of self-denial. Wine flowed, pork sizzled, masked revellers parodied everything sacred. At the calends of January in parts of France and Germany, chaos reigned with a different flavour. Townspeople lit torches and paraded through the streets in animal masks, banging pots and chanting nonsense rhymes to scare off evil spirits, and each other. In some towns, men dressed as women, and children were allowed to boss around adults. It was theatrical, unruly, and barely tolerated by the church, but too popular to stamp out. It was absurd, it was anarchic, and it was approved, sort of, because even the church understood something. If you don't let people blow off steam, they'll tear down the boiler. So whether you were born noble or nameless, festivals weren't just part of life. They were how life was understood, endured, and occasionally enjoyed. Chapter 3. Festum Fatuorum, the Feast of Fools, Paris. Winter, 1431. The city groans under the weight of frost and fasting. But inside Notre Dame Cathedral, something unholy is happening. It's the Feast of Fools, and today the sacred becomes sacrilegious. The choir has gone rogue. Monks chant parodies of holy hymns, while incense burners belch, smoke made from shoe leather and dung. A donkey is led to the pulpit and brays on cue, and the crowd cheers. A boy, no older than 15, sits on a mock bishop's throne, wearing vestments 2 sizes too big and a wine stain across the chest. He blesses the congregation by name, to Brother Jacques the Flatulent and Sister Madeleine the Ale-blooded, go in peace. To modern eyes, this looks like chaos, blasphemy even, but in medieval minds it was a ritualized inversion, a day to vent, mock, purge and cleanse. The church tolerated it, barely. The Pope issued edicts condemning the feast, calling it scandalous. Bishops banned it, only to reinstate it when public pressure mounted. Because here's the secret, this wasn't an accident, it was cultural maintenance. One day a year, everyone got to laugh at the system. And by laughing, they reinforced it. Better a fool in the pulpit once a year than a rebellion in the streets. And just like that, it ended. The masks came off, the wine dried, the bishop's mitre was folded away until next year. By sunrise, the cathedral was clean, the pews were filled with proper parishioners, and the donkey was back in the stable. But for one night, one sanctioned, sacred night, the people of Paris glimpsed a world turned upside down, and they loved every second of it. The Feast of Fools wasn't about breaking faith. It was about making it bearable. Because when life gives you plague, taxes, war and hunger, sometimes the only thing left to do is crown a jackass bishop and call it divine. Chapter 4. Masks, Meaning and Memory. So what were medieval festivals really about? They were more than just excuses to drink and dance. They were rituals, carefully crafted to bring order, release tension, and stitch society back together. In a world where most people had no power, festivals gave them roles to play. The Fool, the Queen of May, the Lord of Misrule. For a day, identity could shift. For a moment, life could breathe. These weren't frivolous distractions. They were the emotional infrastructure of the Middle Ages. They reinforced belief. They honoured survival. And sometimes they mocked the very powers that upheld them, just enough to keep things from collapsing. Strip away the mud, the masks and the mead, and what you're left with is this: a world desperate for meaning. A people finding it in pageantry, parody and prayer. So, which medieval festival would you crash if you had a time machine? The Feast of Fools in Paris? A May Day romp in the woods? Or maybe a royal tournament, front row seats and a mug of questionable ale? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and click the notification bell. And if you want to see what happened after the feast, when the masks came off and reality returned, check out our last video.